All right. I believe we are on
YouTube
live now. Okay, great. So welcome again, everyone, to the 17th International Primatology Lecture on Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of the Field. I'm Susumu Tomiya at the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology, also known as CICASP, at Kyoto University. We've been running this lecture series for close to a year and a half now, I believe. And so far we have had 16 wonderful lectures by distinguished scientists from across the globe who have dedicated their careers to the study of primates. In each lecture, we ask the speaker to illuminate the historical development of primatology and along the way offer their perspectives on how to push the field forward, and more generally, how to become a good scientist and contribute to the world. There will be a time for Q&A after today's lecture, so please stay tuned. And as usual, I'd like to ask Dr. Mike Huffman, who is the founder of this lecture series, to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Janette Wallis.
Thanks, Susumu. Janette, welcome, welcome, welcome. For those listening in today, it's really a great pleasure and an honor to have Janette speak to us today. She's probably one of my oldest primatological friends, and I'm not talking about her age. She's still very young at heart. But I first met Janette in 1981 in San Antonio, Texas, at the first, I think it was maybe the first American Society of Primatologists meeting. It was the first I ever went to, and I think that was the first year that AJP as a journal was published. And we were both studying mate choice in primates. I was just finishing my first year studying Japanese macaque mate choice, and Janette was giving a lecture on captive chimpanzee mate choice, if my memory serves. And I was too shy to ask a question during the lecture time, so afterwards I ran up and asked her a question, and we've been questioning each other ever since. We've crossed paths in Africa, all around the world at different meetings and things, and I've always been very impressed with how much she does, how many different ways she's contributed to primatology, and how she's always there for people, and always at meetings there to get things going, move along initiatives, and she's just really been very productive in so many ways. So I think for all of those reasons, today will be a very special talk, and I think everyone will have something to learn from our dear friend Janette. So take it away.
Thank you, Mike. I will now. My screen went away. I'm going to go ahead and get started and share my screen. So if you can let me know immediately whether you can see the screen. Does everybody see my screen?
It's coming up. It's up. Yeah,
it's great. Okay,
good to go.
Excellent. So I was. I want to thank everybody for being here, and I explained to you that I was asked to talk about my career as an independent primatologist, and by that I mean I haven't gone the regular route. I haven't done the tenure track situation at a university. I haven't done the hoop jumping that comes with a lot of the university thing. I've done some short stints working with different universities, but it's always been on a temporary basis, part-time usually. And so I just want to share my path with you, basically what I've done over the years. So today's lecture is going to be a little bit different from what you've seen in some of the other lectures in this series. I'm going to trace the steps of my career more or less chronologically. Some of the things I've done have overlapped many years, so to some extent, it's not going to be chronological. And it's going to be less about research results than about details about how I got the opportunities to do the different research studies that I've done. And along the way, I'm going to intersperse a little bit about lessons I've learned or possibly advice that I give to you, graduate students, but they'll be kind of spliced in as we go along. And I want to make sure that you understand this, the advice I'm giving and the description I'm giving about my career doesn't have to relate just to primatology. I think that anybody seeking a field, seeking a career in wildlife biology or other kinds of areas that are science-based could also take the advice of having a more independent career going. And I want to also mention, instead of at the end having acknowledgements and thank yous, I'm going to intersperse, and I'm going to do it now, with a start with thanking the SciCast people for having me, Mike Huffman, my old friend, Susumu, Andrew, Kasia, and you students who are tuning in. So you'll see this little green box down here that occasionally will pop up and thank people that I've interacted with along the way. And I apologize in advance. I'm not necessarily going to read all of those, but I want you to understand that, as a lot of the other lecturers have talked with you about, nothing happens in a vacuum. You don't do it on your own. It's always with somebody giving you an opportunity or somebody working alongside you and so forth. One of the things that seem to be popping up on a lot of the different lectures is the same word, serendipity. And I'm going to borrow it as well. It seems to be an ongoing theme that our careers, oftentimes they don't go the way we planned them to. Sometimes they take a different turn here and there. And often it's because of something unique that comes along, a new opportunity that presents itself. So a little bit of advice up front: be open to opportunities. Don't shy away from new things that come along. Be flexible. And you'll notice as I go through this tons of slides I have here today that I had to be flexible on a number of occasions. Carve your own path. Don't let anybody else tell you how you need to be seeking your career, or for that matter, seeking to start your life. It's your life, it's your career. Carve it out the way you want it to and what seems right for you. I want to encourage you to revisit old interests. In other words, hang on to the things that are early interests of yours and be willing to go back and look at them again. I've found this to be a case for me frequently, that I've gone back to old themes, but also at the same time develop new interests. Always be open to new things. So a lot of the previous lecturers have gone so far back, they've talked about their ancestors and so forth. I decided to just start with my own self and my family. So we're going to talk about going from this to this to this. And you may be asking yourself, why would you want to do that? Why on earth? And I can't answer that question for you. But most of the people that have given these lectures, and in fact, many scientists that you talk to, they'll say, oh, I've always loved animals, and so I did such and such, or I grew up watching nature shows. And so, but the fact is, all children love animals, don't they? And doesn't everybody watch nature shows? So I'm not sure that sets me apart or sets any of us apart. If I look at my childhood, my favorite cartoon was Mr. Peabody and his pet boy Sherman. Peabody was the dog. Television shows, one of the ones I watched that I sort of gained some enthusiasm and inspiration from was the Beverly Hillbillies, that had this character that always was surrounded by animals. She called them her critters. So I thought that was something that was reminiscent of my childhood. I found this online. This was not my original dog, but I had one just like it, one of my favorite toys as a child. And as an American girl, I pretty much was required to have a Barbie. So this is my actual Barbie. And my favorite toy as a child was this bear. And I still have this bear. I actually took this photograph yesterday. So I want you to notice that nothing on this screen is a non-human primate. Nothing's there as a non-human primate. In fact, there are a lot of dogs, and I am a cat person. I am not even particularly fond of dogs, so I don't know what went wrong there. But what I can say is that I had an early start in a loving family, a loving home. This is the house I grew up in. These are my parents that are not with us anymore. Up in this upper right corner, are you able to see my cursor, by the way? I'm not sure that that's coming through. Okay. I'm the cheery one. All of the photos of me at that age, I was pouting or crying. This is the extended family, but it's only part of them. It's rare for us to get everybody in one picture these days. And this lovely trio, this is myself and my sister Elizabeth and Margie, when we were, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, a picture that we had taken for our parents. And I would like to say to you that this was the last time we dressed alike for a photo, but that's not actually true. We do this frequently, and it's pretty embarrassing. I think there's something wrong with us. But tracing back something that happened in my childhood that probably helped shape my interest in wildlife and my interest in nature was going to my grandpa's house. This is my paternal grandparents, Wallis's, and they lived in this farmhouse in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. And this is me. You can't, I don't know if you can see the arrow, but I'm the skinny one here. I got the opportunity when I was at that house to, for the first time, go outside, go out to the country, go out to the woods, go walk along creeks, look for frogs, do things that I never had a chance to do at my home in Oklahoma City. And the reason why I think that it must have shaped things for me is that well into my adulthood, long after my grandparents had died, well into my adulthood, I would dream about this property, this house, and not the people, but the wildlife, the outdoors, and it just stayed with me. And so I'm pretty sure that this is part of what kind of shaped my wish to kind of get to nature and so forth. Now, in high school, in junior high and high school, I was able to expand my interest in science and looking around at things. I was in the Honor Society, and I actually got a science award because I took more science classes than anybody else and got A's in them. It wasn't that I necessarily was a great scientist, but it set me on that path of knowing that this was a rewarding kind of thing to do. I got into politics. I was the student senate president and served on an intracity student council group. Got to go to Girls State. You may not know what that is, but it's like a statewide group of young people that come together for a week and practice government, kind of learn about government and learn about leadership. And ultimately, I got a scholarship to the University of Oklahoma that was in their president's leadership class. So that basically set the stage, since we didn't have enough money to send me away, for me to go to the fairly nearby University of Oklahoma. Now, my earliest plan was to be a doctor. At that time, I thought, since I liked biology, I liked chemistry, I'll be pre-med and my major will be chemistry. Well, after a while, I realized chemistry was not really my thing. It was harder on my grade point average than I thought it would be. So I crossed that out and I switched to psychology. And switching to psychology as a major, that one switch is the reason I'm sitting here talking to you today. Because during that time, at the University of Oklahoma, one of the faculty members had a program with chimpanzees, captive chimpanzees, and one of the faculty members was teaching chimpanzees sign language. This was Roger Fouts that had formerly been in working with Washoe. He brought Washoe to the University of Oklahoma and continued the sign language work. And Dr. Fouts said on one occasion, I am looking for people to volunteer to help one of the graduate students who's working with a chimp and they just needed help with this chimp, getting him practiced on the words that he already knew. So just practice with him. And that's when I discovered chimpanzees. I discovered that I love chimpanzees. I don't know if you can see this photo very well, but this is Ali, and he's signing blanket. And I was just basically helping to teach and reteach, practice with this guy, his words that he already knew. I found that I didn't like the sign language program per se. What I basically didn't like teaching animals something that I wanted them to know. What I really wanted to know is what the chimps could teach me. I really wanted to know about chimps and what made them tick. So I switched from the language program and started working on social behavior and sexual behavior, and ultimately got a Bachelor of Science in psychology. Actually, I took all the classes that you need to take for a zoology degree too. And then, since I was kind of on a roll, I decided to go ahead and enter graduate school. But to go to graduate school at the University of Oklahoma at that time, and to get a degree in a particular area, they were very strict about which courses you could take outside your discipline. And I knew that strictly psychology wasn't the direction I wanted to go. There were too many areas of zoology that I was interested in. And in fact, anthropology was obviously important to me, being a primate person. So I approached the graduate college to have an interdisciplinary program, something they do very often and willingly today, but back then it took a lot of hoop jumping to get an interdisciplinary degree. But I did it. I got my master's in zoology, psychology, and anthropology combined. The downside of doing something like that for me, though, was that because I was interdisciplinary, I didn't qualify to receive a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. In fact, none of these different departments fully embraced me. I didn't have the kind of mentoring that you might have if you were strictly within one department. And what that meant is I had to have a job to be able to pay for my tuition and make a living, paying my rent and so forth. So I started working in the mental health field. I worked with children, psychiatric patients at a nearby hospital. And keep that in mind, because that was one of those side things that I did for a living, but that frequently came back as being something that qualified me for other future opportunities. I stuck around at the same place, regrettably, in a way, because I think it's a good idea when you're in graduate school or undergrad to venture around and do different things. But I got all three of my degrees at the same place. And the PhD was also zoology, psychology, and anthropology. And the areas of research, I mentioned that I got interested in social behavior. Mike already mentioned I studied sexual behavior, mate choice, things like that, and was able to be fairly productive publishing in those early days on these various topics. One of the areas that kind of popped up, and this is one of those serendipitous things that I just happened to notice as I was living my life watching these chimps, is that I was noticing that females that lived together within one group tended to synchronize their menstrual cycles, as opposed to comparing those females to members of another group. And this is very similar to something, a phenomenon that's known to occur in humans. But this was the first time that anybody had found it in chimpanzees. So I was able to get a publication out of that. And this is one of those revisiting topics that I'll come back to later, because it was something that was really important to me. But one thing that happened as I was not, I don't think it was the conference that Mike was talking about. I think it was another conference, but I had the opportunity to meet Ronald Nadler, who worked at Emory in Atlanta. And he studied sexual behavior in all apes, but he was specifically gearing up to go to Gabon to there's a reproductive breeding, or there's a reproductive center. It's devoted mostly to human reproduction, but they have on hand captive chimpanzees at this facility in the middle of Gabon. And he had an opportunity to go there and study the chimpanzees, specifically looking at the changes that the chimps go through hormonally and behaviorally as they go from juvenile to adolescent to adulthood. So he invited me to go along. So this was my first experience to go to Africa. And there I am after a chimp got out of the cage, but there were two large social groups of small chimps, and then two of these larger areas with another larger groups. And as I said already, behavioral observations, basically the same thing that I was doing back in Oklahoma, sitting and watching chimps in a cage interact with each other, fight with each other, play with each other, whatever they decided to do. I was now doing this with youngsters in Gabon at this facility. Now, this facility was it's a very interesting place because it was right in the middle of Africa, but it was a compound with villas and a swimming pool and a tennis court, and very much not like what we're accustomed to thinking about being in Africa. And in fact, not very far from where this photograph is taken, you can go outside the compound, go to a market and see bushmeat and see a very different world, so these two worlds of Africa were thrown at me at one time. I was quite young at the time, and so it was an interesting experience, but I enjoyed it. It sold me on Africa. It was a French-speaking country, so I was a little out of my league there with French, but got some publications out of that. A shout out to Barbara King, who we picked her to come for the next year of the project, and she actually overlapped with me on a project we did on crab-eating macaques. Crab-eating macaques are Asian, but they had a colony of them at this facility. So I came back home, finished writing up my PhD, which meant doing some lab analysis. I had collected blood from the chimps, the captive chimps, and so analyzed the hormone data. I wrote up those papers that I just talked about. I got a job working at the Department of Mental Health. That's where the mental health experience came in. And also worked for a place called the Institute for Child Advocacy. That was a really rewarding opportunity to talk about teen pregnancy, which is one of the things I started at the Department of Mental Health, a teen suicide prevention thing, teen pregnancy clinic that we worked with, and so forth. And then the grant money ran out, and so I got shifted over to the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. The obstetrics and gynecology department welcomed me to be a part of their program only because I was a good writer. There were some faculty members that were coming up for tenure, and I helped write their papers and help get them into shape. So I had this kind of bizarre situation. I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I accepted a postdoc in North Carolina to do similar kind of work with human adolescents that I had been doing with chimpanzees, which is to look at behavior and hormone levels and so forth. But in the meantime, a very interesting thing happened, and that is I kept revisiting that synchrony of cycles thing that I mentioned before. And I'd been encouraged by people to see if this happens in the wild. You know, it's not common for female chimps to really spend that much time together, or at least at the time, that's what we thought. Turns out that's not quite the story, but does it happen in the wild? So I didn't want to go start a field program just to answer that one question, because chimps take so long to cycle and reproductive things interfere, and they have interbirth interval of 5.5 years, and that was going to be a lot to deal with. So, I wasn't prepared to do that. So I thought, well, is there anybody who has a lot of data on chimpanzees that might be willing to let me look at them to see if I can tease apart any of these synchrony issues? And of course, the name that comes to mind at that time anyway was Jane Goodall. So I wrote to Jane Goodall, explained my research idea, and basically asked her, can I have a look at the data that you collected all these years, or your field assistants have collected all these years? And it took a long time, because back then, this was before email. It was before text messaging. It was sitting down and actually writing with your hand a letter to somebody with a stamped envelope and everything. Do people know what a stamped envelope is anymore? I don't know, but she finally answered, and she said, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. But in order to do this, you're going to have to come to Tanzania, because all of the data are stored at my house in Dar es Salaam on the coast. And that's what you're going to have to do. So I didn't know what to do. I thought about it a while, and then I thought, okay, I'll just write a grant for the money to get there and do this. And then remember, I had accepted this future opportunity to go to North Carolina. So I had to get this done if I was going to do it. So I wrote a National Science Foundation grant to get a plane ticket, go to Jane's place, buy a photocopier and a bunch of reams of paper, and sit there and photocopy everything I wanted to do, and stick all the pieces of paper in luggage and bring it home, and then move to North Carolina. Okay, that was the plan. Well, I got the National Science Foundation grant, so I got to go to Tanzania. And while I was in Tanzania, while I was there at Jane's house in Dar, she said, well, I suppose while you're here, you're going to want to go visit Gombe. And I said, well, yeah, okay. And if for those of you who don't know what Gombe is, that's Gombe National Park is the place that Jane did all of her work, and the work is continuing even today. It's all the way across the country. So I flew to, and it's just north of Mahale, where Mike has probably talked to you a lot about Mahale National Park. So went to Gombe, and it was beautiful. It is beautiful. It's rugged, it's hilly, and there are chimps there, and they're real life chimps that are living wild. And it was a great opportunity. And I arrived at a time, kind of a disturbing time, because there was a disease outbreak in the baboons that lived there. So because of my experience already with the chimps, where I had collected blood, I drew blood, I'd been able to give injections, I did all of those kinds of things, I fit in well with the team of people that treated this disease. And you can see it's kind of a nasty disease that affected the baboons. And it horrifies me right now when I look at these pictures that I'm not wearing gloves. So try to ignore the fact that I'm being very irresponsible in these photos. But we darted and treated 100 baboons in 6 days. This is Ken Pack, the veterinarian that oversaw the darting and measured the quantity of medications and so forth that I gave. This is Tony Collins, Anthony Collins, who's the baboon researcher, or I don't know what his title is, but director of baboon research, basically. And you see Jane there standing with some of the baboon field assistants. One of her main jobs during this process was to shield Ken while he snuck up and darted the baboons. So we were all in it. We all worked together on it. It was wonderful experience, at least for us, not so much for the baboons. But sometime during this process, I don't know if it was during this event with the disease treatment, or if it was right before that, but Jane offered me a job. She said basically Tony was on the site 6 months a year, 3 months there, 3 months back home in Scotland, 3 months there. So she wanted somebody that could be there during the 3 months that Tony wasn't there. So she offered me this job. What are you going to do? You call the guys in North Carolina and you tell them, sorry, I got another offer. And again, I probably since that time, I haven't had two people wanting my attention for a job, but great opportunity. So I joined the team, and this is just a small collection of the field assistants that worked there. I think at one point there's as many as 26 people working with us, and just a great opportunity to direct the chimp work. And when Tony wasn't around, then having to also oversee the baboon work. Sharing this role over that period was miraculous. It was just, I hate to use the word awesome because people use it too much, but in this case, it's an actual word. Awesome is the experience of working at Gombe. On the left here, I have to point out Hilali Matama. He was the head field assistant. Probably, if you asked me to sit down and list the top favorite humans I've ever known, he's probably on that list. Wonderful, wonderful experience to work at Gombe and to actually see chimps in the wild, doing chimp things, not inside a cage, and teaching me what they wanted me to learn from them. And I got to do some research. I got to write up some sexual behavior, pregnancy behavior, the swelling that chimps have during pregnancy. And I also did a whole survey of the data looking at the different parameters. So this is something that's actually come in handy, not only for me, but for some other people at other sites, looking at, what is the average length of gestation? What is the average age of first this? What is the average this or that? So looking at all these years of data was crucial to that. And that first question that I had gone there to ask in the first place, the whole synchrony thing, I was able to find that, in fact, there was some synchrony going on, some social cueing, I call it, when females were first starting to cycle, or when they were first starting to cycle after giving birth. So all of these things, I'm not going to talk more about the research on this topic, but if you want to know more about it, email me. I can send you copies of articles or discuss it by email. And the other thing, this last thing on here, I just want to quickly mention it because I'll come back to it later. It's the thing that I came away from the area knowing more than the synchrony issue. I found that there were seasonal trends in what was going on. It was the dry season when I saw more sexual activity, dry season when I saw more conceptions. And certain things, something was up, something was happening that was producing some trends that were seasonal trends. And again, I'll come back to that later. But I just want to give a shout out to the various people and chimps that were so wonderful to welcome me to Gombe and making that such a great experience. But one of the negatives that I came away with, not just about Gombe, but other places, is that we weren't paying attention in those days. And I say those days because, remember, what I'm talking about here is before COVID. COVID has changed everything. But even before COVID, we started getting serious about the potential for disease transmission. You know that in captivity, people that are around the chimpanzees have to cover they have to wear masks, they have to wear gloves, they have to take precautions. But in the wild, we weren't doing any of that. And sometimes we were making contact. We were actually too close to them to be very safe, because we can transmit diseases to wild animals, wild primates and wild chimps especially, because they're so closely related to us. through airborne transmission, waterborne transmission. Here's Tony drinking from the river or the stream. Here's Everett drinking from the same stream. Fecal oral transmission and fomite transmission. If you don't know what the word fomite is, that is any kind of inanimate object that can still have pathogenic material on it. So this guy handing bananas to a chimpanzee, if he happens to have any kind of pathogen on his hand and it rubs off on the banana and the chimp puts that banana in her mouth, it can be bad news for the chimp. And I can tell you actually that within a year of the time that that photo was taken, that mother and her twin babies, all three died from some kind of respiratory illness. So that got me into the mode of not just publishing, the publication per se was not the issue. The publication was an awareness raising effort. And I wanted to reach out to more than just the people who might read primate journals. So I contacted the American Society of Primatologists, and I put together a working group on this topic, and we developed a statement, so like a policy statement for the ASP to have on their, you can go to their website right now and see a copy of this policy statement about protecting the health of wild primates. I did the same thing with the International Journal of Primatology, or International Primatological Society, to put a policy statement on their website. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and mention, prior to the health one, I did a private ownership of primates policy statement for ASP. These things, I fit these in the category of service. When the title of my talk was saying, research, conservation, and service, this is just something that you can get involved doing with either educational awareness raising, spreading information that needs to be spread. Nobody paid me to do these things. Nobody asked me to do these things. I just did them. And it's something that I would encourage all of you to be willing, stick your neck out. If you see something that needs to be done, do it, right? And just for sake of making sure to wrap things up on this health issue, maintaining a safe distance. This was a mistake. This was Hilali sitting there, and Goblin came and approached him. That was never something that was planned. And Safiri is rolling his body away from being close to this young juvenile that came nearby. Don't leave human things near chimp or baboon. In this case, that's my shirt that she's got in her hand. I never saw that shirt again. Because of that fomite issue that I mentioned. Anything that's on a human item can carry pathogens. Make careful and informed decisions about when and how to treat diseases. And I wanted to include this for a couple of reasons. This is Goblin. He was attacked by the new alpha male who came in and challenged him. And this was actually the second time he was attacked, and he got a horrible infection. He stopped eating. He stopped traveling with anybody else. He stopped making a nest, just slept on the ground. We were pretty sure he was dying. And I did something that I now would consider a total no-no. Do not do it. But I felt compassion for this chimp. We all did. We all really cared a lot for him. So we started feeding him. We started bringing food for him, bowls of water. And we gave him medicine, and I groomed him. I actually reached out and started grooming him and trying to comfort him because he was so miserable. And again, we were pretty sure it was just a few days that we were going to have him around. And that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. It's not something I would encourage anybody to do. Don't do that. Do not touch chimps, especially don't do it if you don't have gloves on or masks on. And he surprised us. He got better and he lived for about 12 more years. So he did not die on us at that time. And again, it changed the dynamic of our relationship after that. But the only people that should be touching apes in the wild are trained veterinarians. This is Felicia Nutter and Chris Whittier, who are a PhD DVM team that were working with mountain gorillas for a while. They're the only ones that should be actually touching. And I'm going to, the other thing that I'm doing wrong here is that I'm showing you a picture of me touching a primate. And this is something that we're very interested now in campaigning against, unless you can do what I just did, which is to educate people about the bad side of this. Later in the lecture, I'll actually talk a little bit more about the awareness of that. So let's talk a little bit more about the concept of service. American Society of Primatologists, I mentioned before, and it hurts me to squeeze ASP down to one slide, but I served on many committees. I chaired 2 committees for ASP, and then I was elected the executive secretary 2 times a few years back. I represented ASP on the Bushmeat Crisis Task Force, and I started a book series, and you can see the covers of the books here. Those are available on the ASP website. I think you can still get them. I got the President's Award in 2008, I think mainly because I did that book series. I think it was just in recognition of that work. And I hosted 2 ASP meetings. I think Mike attended that first one. Am I right? No, okay. So you attended the one in 2002, and just last year I did another one. So hosting a conference, it's a huge amount of work, especially if you're like me and you're not strictly attached to a university where you have access to tons of students to help. I had a few students that I picked off of other areas, but it was a lot of work, but rewarding. And I'm glad I did it, actually. So now we've got another situation. We've got another map on our screen. And this is a case where our friend Vernon Reynolds contacted me. He knew that I wasn't working at Gombe anymore, but he was intrigued by this idea of going through the records like I had done at Gombe at his site. So he works at Budongo. At the time, it's just called Budongo Forest Project. It says as another name now. But he invited me to get involved with looking at their data. So I said, okay, I'll go to Uganda. Sounds good to me. And so this is Vernon. You're going to see Vernon in a couple of other shots here. This is actually a conference Vernon organized at the nearby forestry college. And experiencing going to another field site with another program, a massive program that's grown really big. I was just there this year, and it seems to have doubled in size. And one of the main things I wanted to do with research at Uganda was to follow up on that idea about seasonal influence that I had found at Gombe. So now I'm able to compare Budongo Forest and Uganda, in Uganda, and then the Gombe National Park chimpanzees in Tanzania. This is a map that shows the location for the two. And you notice here, the blue line is the equator. So Budongo is just north and Gombe is south. And I looked at things like, for example, I looked at the trends of copulation. So they both are non-even distribution. You can tell that just by looking at it. And so I couldn't tell that there was anything important there. And then I remembered, if you look at this, they're on either side of the equator. They have different seasons. Their seasons are out of sync. And so if you change these data to graphs that start when the rainy season starts, so in this case, starting in November, and in Budongo starting in March. Now look at those pink bars. Now you actually see a similar kind of thing. So you're now seeing the same kind of things. Things are happening in the dry season, right? And as copulations happening in dry season, you're going to obviously get more conceptions happening in dry season. And this leads to a lot of other questions like what's causing it? Is it possible that there's some steroidal content in their foods that they're eating that's acting like some kind of a stimulant to the reproductive cycle? And if that's true, then is there some kind of food that is deterring their reproductive cycles? All kinds of questions that I could talk for 5 hours on that. But if you just write to me, I can send you some publications to read up on. And again, a big thank you to Vernon Reynolds for welcoming me to get involved in Budongo. And also another thanks for the Gombe people who collected the data that are used in there as well. But another thing that happened when I was involved with Uganda, and that is something, again, serendipitous kind of situation. If you remember, Budongo is located in this area. This dark patch is Budongo Forest. And if you zoom into the area, you're going to notice that there are a lot of little tiny forest areas, forest patches, forest fragments. And this area here that looks like a real patchwork is because of a sugar plantation. But you'll notice there are a lot of little forests within the sugar plantation and elsewhere. And an interesting thing happened one day. This is Masindi over here, this town. This road that goes from Masindi toward Budongo, Vernon and his some of his team were driving along one day, and they were stopped in the road by a young man, this young man, Richard Chimanua, who said, "You guys are the guys that study Budongo chimps, right? Well, there are chimps right here." So, and he was talking about this little area here, Kasokwa. So this little forest patch along here, it runs approximately 4 miles along the road, had chimpanzees in it. We went, we saw them. There they are. Not just chimps, but other primate species are living there. So Vernon took Richard under his wing, had the field staff at Budongo train him about how to collect data. And we started this little side project called the Kasokwa Forest Project. And over time, Vernon asked me to just go ahead and take it over. So I've been funding it ever since. It's got a lot of downside. It's got a lot of threats. The sugar plantation is an ever big problem, although they would say that we're a problem for them. This is I don't know if you can see it, but it's a man trap, a steel trap that in this case Joseph is dislodging it, but our alpha male was not so fortunate. He got caught in one and had to carry that around for a couple of months until finally it fell off, taking a couple of the tips of his fingers with it. So we've continued the project. It has stayed, but I'm going to zip away from this topic for a minute and come back to it later so that you'll see what else is happening there. First, I have to remind you that all this time, I still needed to make a living. So I actually got involved in the topic of environmental enrichment with captive primates, working with baboons in a captive facility in Oklahoma. And a lot of good things happened then. I feel like we did good for these these baboons that had been living in very sterile conditions until we got the funding to give them a better life. In the end, it wasn't the greatest experience because I don't think it's another species that doesn't belong in captivity. And sometimes the people that work with captive baboons are not particularly nice people. But I did work with some really wonderful students that are listed here, and I'm grateful to that experience. One interesting thing that happened along the way, do you remember the fact that I was touching my face in that early slide? Well, baboons do this thing that's called a muzzle wipe. And they do it when they're a little bit confused about something. In this case, she knows me. Did you see she did that just then? And there's another video here. I'm not going to play it because I don't want to run out of time. But muzzle wiping, or what Hans Kummer used to call circle wiping, is something that occurs at a time of uncertainty. It's basically a decision making. Is this what I expect to see? Is it not what I expect to see? And it reminded me, it kind of set me on a path of wondering about these things that we do, because humans do this too. We touch our face, we touch our head, and you don't have to know the language of somebody who's scratching their forehead or touching their finger to their face and moving their eyes in one direction. These are all universal things that happen worldwide. In uncertainty, puzzlement, confusion, worry, anxiety, those are just some of the description of behaviors that, or internal feelings, thoughts that are happening. And we might refer to these things as self-directed behaviors that are leaking what's going on. I refer to it as internal conflict, or something about decision making. And we'll come back to this topic one more time later in the lecture. So let's talk about teaching and travel. At this time, I got this really unique opportunity to, it was in 2003. I was no longer working with the baboon facility, but I got an opportunity to go to Equatorial Guinea. Now, Equatorial Guinea, I don't know if you can see it on the map, but it's two pieces. There's this mainland piece, and then there's this little island called Bioko. And I had the opportunity to go teach within the Bioko Biodiversity Protection Program on behalf of my friend Gail Hearn, who is with Drexel University. I believe she's retired now, but she asked me to come be a visiting lecturer and teach biological research methods. Now, the big challenge there was that it was a Spanish-speaking country, and the kind of Spanish they speak is different from the Spanish that I learned in school. This is more of a Castilian, more like they actually speak in Spain than in Mexico. So it's very hard for me. And the whole time I had to have a translator to teach, but it was a rewarding experience nonetheless. More bush meat on the I started to say menu, on the schedule. It was a difficult thing. Bioko, most of the primates that live in Bioko are endangered or critically endangered. And I just threw in some other photos here to kind of show the experience. If you go to Africa and you don't get stuck in the mud, you failed at being in Africa. This is a requirement to get stuck in the mud. But we made a trip, we made a field trip with the students from Bioko to the mainland. So this is Monte Alon National Park, and we continued our education there. So you may not know what this is, but it's a gorilla nest. Gorillas, like chimpanzees, make nests, but because they're heavy, they tend to make their nests lower to the ground. And so we've climbed up into a gorilla nest, and the student is practicing collecting hair. It wasn't a study. He's just practicing the skill of collecting and storing it properly and so forth. So again, this was a really wonderful opportunity, just 10 weeks, but it sort of cemented my interest in teaching field courses. I hadn't really had that particular kind of experience yet. And then the following year, this is another thing that just dropped in my lap. Two different people recommended me for this job of being a consultant to a project in Sierra Leone. And I put this in here just to show the setting on the coastline, how peaceful and beautiful it is. But Sierra Leone had a history of about almost 10 years of civil unrest, civil war. And during that time, the construction of a hydroelectric plant and a dam, I don't know if you can really see the dam, that's the gray part of this photograph here, it stopped. They had to stop entirely during the war. And at the end of the war, when things started up again, and they got funding from the World Bank, they had to do more environmental assessment, impact studies, and surveying the area for botanical features and so forth. But the reason I got involved in it is I was asked to become the international primate expert, which is what the funders said they need, was somebody outside the country to come in and speak on behalf of chimpanzees, because this whole valley that you see that was ultimately flooded for the for the hydroelectric operation was home to chimpanzees. And the chimps that live in Sierra Leone, they're not just endangered, that subspecies is listed as critically endangered. So it's really important that we go in, assess the area, and try to develop plans for mitigation. I was added very late to the project, as I said, so I didn't get to be part of the main survey work, but I took the opportunity to teach a few field techniques, sampling techniques, getting out and meeting people when I went there. And I love this photo because this woman asked to take the photo a second time because she wanted to make sure that her duck was looking at the camera. Not really sure why, but I loved that. But it was a great opportunity to serve as a consultant, to work alongside a fantastic team. And again, the people in this photo did the bulk of the work. I just wrote the report and analyzed the data, but they did the hard work out there. I should mention Abdullah Bari, he just goes by Barry. I'm working with him now again and another consultancy that I hope I'll have time to mention as we go along. So really great opportunity there. Some more teaching and travel. And in this time, this was really something I couldn't pass up this opportunity to do. And that was to help literally start a university. The then vice president of the country of Nigeria, Atiku Abubakar, was starting a university, and he wanted to model it after American style universities. In fact, he called it the American University of Nigeria. And this is the starting faculty. This is as many as we were. So we were the founding members of the faculty. Here I am at the very end. And I worked there for almost 5 years, came home for summer and a long Christmas break, but that was a unique opportunity to start a university. When I first went there, we actually were in temporary buildings at another location while these new buildings were being built. I taught zoology, I taught ecology, and I want to point out, this is Nachamada Jeffrey, or he goes by Nacha Jeffrey, has become a seriously famous and accomplished conservationist working at Yankari National Park in Nigeria. I'm very proud of him. I want to cry every time I see him because I'm just so proud of his accomplishments. All of these guys are accomplished, and many of them stay in touch with me. And you can see behind them a cage. There were 2 free-ranging monkeys. These are Tantalus monkeys, closely related to the vervet monkey that you saw in the Gombe pictures. And they were, it's a long story, which I won't go into, but they were running loose on the campus. And so we built that cage, but then later we had them move to another location. So I built some, I'm not a carpenter, as you can tell, but I built these cages to transport them to a forest area in the southern part of Nigeria at Ngelnyaki. And this is Hazel Chapman's organization. And we built a cage there to try to slowly do a soft release introduction to the wild Tantalus monkeys. It was not a successful program. Ultimately, there were 2 babies born, by the way, and it was not successful in introduction. We ended up having to transfer them to an actual sanctuary where they lived happily. So, but back to Yola in Nigeria, that experience, I started a nature club and took students out hiking in 120-degree Fahrenheit weather. Occasionally got the opportunity to see baboons in the area. So that was truly an outstanding experience. And this is Mr. Atiku Abubakar, who is right now running for president of Nigeria. And he gave me an award. I got the Founders Day Teaching Award. Actually, it was given to me on behalf of the students who, I guess, elected me or gave me good ratings or whatever. But never in my wildest dream did I think I would get a teaching award. And that was my good experience in Nigeria. Now, right after that, I decided not to renew my contract after the 5th year and try something new. This time, it was very interesting going to Tanzania and teaching for a semester-long course at the School for Field Studies. This is, and I'm trying to remember to point you to the websites for these places to be able to learn more about them. But this was just an amazing opportunity. I was based in Tanzania. There was another component in Kenya. But, think about it, being in a field course where you take a field trip to the Serengeti. It's just phenomenal. I still can't believe I had that opportunity for a semester long teaching wildlife ecology. And our camp, the place that we were living that whole time, was right outside, or right nearby, I should say, Lake Manyara National Park. It's probably my favorite national park that doesn't have chimps in it. And it was a great opportunity to take students and do directed research programs. So the idea behind the whole course is that the faculty divided up the students, and then you took your cohort of students and did different projects. And all of my students did baboon work, and these are the topics that they studied. And I should mention here that throughout the time that they were doing their work, they were told to make any notes about muzzle wiping, that thing that baboons do. And I'm finding that literally now, 12 years later, I actually have been going back through the notes. I've been going back through the videotape that we've done, and I'm actually going to write up a paper on muzzle wiping from that one short experience, because I found that it is possible. If you pay attention, you can actually watch this behavior occur and look at the context. Now, I want to mention a few more things about service. I talked about American Society of Primatologists. One of the other societies that I'm heavily involved in right now is the Society for Conservation Biology. And this is one I really want to talk up with you guys, because even if you're not focused on primates, this is conservation and biology in general. Our next conference happens to be in Rwanda next year, so obviously there's a gorilla on the picture. But go to their website, conbio.org, and you can learn a lot about what they do. Great resources, jobs board, and there's actually an Asia section. So I would encourage the Japanese students that are listening in to see what's happening with that, or if you're doing your research in any of the other areas. For example, I live in the United States, but I am on the board of directors of the Africa section because of my chimp and other work that I do in Africa. So definitely check into them. And I quickly mentioned International Primatological Society earlier. I want to mention them again as a must join organization for you if you are going to study primates. They meet every 2 years, and that is the organization for people to join if they're studying primates. I was honored to be able to serve as the vice president for conservation for 10 years. It's a long time. They enacted term limits at one point, so then I couldn't run for office again. And I got the President's Award in 2018, I think, because I lasted for 10 years in that role. But as vice president for conservation, one of the really rewarding activities was being able to give out grants, to oversee the multiple, I mean, sometimes we'd have as many as 90 or 100 grants come in that I and a committee of people had to go through and judge and decide who got the grants to do conservation work. It was so much work and it was really tough, but it was so worth it. It was rewarding to know that that effort you were putting into, that money you were giving to usually a young primatologist, was going to help jumpstart careers or help protect primates out there. The other thing that was even more rewarding about the vice president for conservation role was that every time the Congress met, during the time I was there, every time the Congress met, for the few days before that, I organized a workshop that focused on primates for young students to come in and spend some time learning from different faculty that came and helped us learning different skills. And throughout that time, for those 10 years, I got to do we called it the PCTP, the Pre-Congress Training Program. So I did 5 of these. I actually did 6 because earlier, before I became vice president for conservation, I actually helped Vernon Reynolds do a similar kind of workshop in Uganda. So 6 of these, organizing, and that means helping to develop, the schedule. It means creating a t-shirt. It means deciding who gets to go to this thing, helping them with their flight arrangements and their visas, and everything was so much work, but again, so rewarding. And I'm very grateful to all of the people that helped with teaching in these exercises, these workshops, and the students. I still stay in touch with a lot of these students on the screen. It's always wonderful to hear from them. And just some of the things that we do, learning about GPS use, learning data entry on a handheld device. This is Mike Reed teaching some biological sample collection techniques, 2 different cases. This photo is taken in Japan. And this was in Kenya. Just learning about how to be a primatologist, but doing it on site in the field. And how many times do you get to stand around and decide to take a photo together and you're photo bombed by elephants? I mean, this was a wonderful opportunity in Kenya. I want to actually take the time to read this, because one of the main reasons why that PCTP thing happened so reliably and so well is that Russ Mittermeier made sure that each time we were able to get a Margot Marsh biodiversity grant, so helped to fund a lot of the cost for this. And what we didn't get through Russ and the Margot Marsh group, Steve Shapiro, who was the treasurer at the time, was very good at knocking on doors electronically and getting grants from various groups. So we couldn't have done this work without Steve. He helped with flight arrangements and so forth. And I wanted to single out Mauricio Talebi. He taught in 4 of the 5 workshops that PCTPs that we did. He was just a mainstay for helping and students love him. So if you ever get a chance to invite Mauricio, and Zimbo. Zimbo was one of our Kenya teachers. And then one of my best friends, who was also one of the lecturers, and that's Lynn Isbell. She was terrific. And the site that we had in Kenya was actually her field site. On the topic of Russ and things that happen with the IUCN, I think I mentioned briefly IUCN earlier, the IUCN Primate Specialist Group, they're in charge of kind of helping to guide conservation issues as it relates to primates. They're involved in helping to sort out and do the assessments for the red list, which I've got a slide later that talks about them. But I serve as the vice president a co-vice chair for the Africa section. I co-chair with several other people, but one of the main things I do for the Primate Specialist Group is I'm the editor-in-chief for African primates. And I've been doing that since 2012. I'm just about ready to publish the 2022 issue. And again, a thanks to Russ, Margot Marsh, Anthony Rylands, who's Russ's right arm. They're the ones that help with all this. And obviously, this is a peer-reviewed journal. I think the reviewers, but it's free to publish in it. It's free to read. So go to the website. This is the cover of many of the issues I've produced. This is the web address that you can go to and download for free. You can download entire issues, or you can download individual articles. Another thing that the IUCN Primate Specialist Group has developed recently, headed up by Sean Waters, and Susan Shane initially was helping her, but it's more Sean now. Looking at primate-human interactions, human-primate interactions. And they touch on a number of different things, and I invite you to look at the website and learn more about it. One of the key things that we've been doing with that group is writing up our guidelines for telling people not to show pictures of themselves. Remember, I said this earlier, don't show pictures of yourself next to wildlife, touching wildlife, doing something that is in any way putting yourself in danger or the animal in danger because of disease transmission. Or also there's the problem of inadvertently encouraging people to want to own primates as pets. So it's an awareness campaign. We've now had it translated into, I think, 24 languages. I think here's the Japanese one. But if you go to the website, you can see the different languages that we've produced. More teaching and travel. This time, I didn't even know that this kind of travel or teaching and travel was possible. I got to do this. This is exactly what it sounds like, a semester at sea, a ship that is a traveling college. And you go to different ports, different voyages, go to different locations, and you have classrooms on the ship. And I got the supreme honor of being able to be on one of these. And look at this trip that we took. Now, I don't know if you can see this very well. I live right about in the middle of the United States of America. And I flew east to Florida and had my trusty GPS with me and took waypoints the whole time. This is the path we took. And come over here. And then we ended up a whole semester later, at the end of the semester, ended up in San Diego, where I flew home from the West. So we went around the planet. And my job on this trip was, I wasn't one of the regular faculty. I applied for that, but I didn't get selected for that. I got selected for organizing the academic program for what's called the lifelong learners. And those are older people, or at least non-students, who also were on that same voyage. And I had no duties when we were docked in different countries. All of my duties were only on the ship. So before we took off, I contacted primatologists that I knew at all of the different places we were going to visit that had primates, and asked their advice very innocently. Where can I go to see primates when I'm in your country on this particular date? And in every case, somebody said, hey, I'll show you my field site. Come on out. So I could talk to you, I won't, but I could talk to you for 6 hours about my experience going to these different field sites along the way. And one of them was right there in Japan, as you'll recognize this. It was just remarkable meeting the people. Some of them I already knew, meeting and getting to see, I think I tallied 23 primate species on this trip, and also getting to hear more about the research everybody was doing and hearing a lot about the community conservation work. That was one of the things that really stuck with me as I had this opportunity to go. A couple of other field teaching opportunities. One was in Ecuador and one is in Costa Rica. The Ecuador one, this was on behalf of the University of Oklahoma, where I got my degree. And it's in the same town where I'm sitting right this minute. But it was a very short course. You see the giant tortoises here. We split our time. Part of the time we just stayed here and did lectures, and then we split our time in Ecuador between Quito, the Galapagos Islands, and the Tipitini Biodiversity Station. Just a few photos from that. I won't go into a lot of detail other than to say this upper right hand, you can see students are standing on this heightened observation deck where they were able to conduct behavioral data collection on primates. That particular site at Tipitini has 10 species of primates. Obviously, these two are from the Galapagos. So really great opportunity. And then the Costa Rican opportunity came along when Kim Dangus, who's pictured here in the lower right, she works has this program called DANTA, field courses in Costa Rica. It stands for the Association of Conservation of the Tropics. It's the Spanish version is DANTA. And she invited me to come be a guest lecturer. And I went down and was able to spend 4 or 5 days. The whole course is much longer, but I went in and really had a great time. Again, another great place to see primates. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for a field course to attend, to go to her website and try to find an opportunity to go to one of those. While I was in Costa Rica, I took the opportunity to visit a sanctuary because I had heard about kids saving the rainforest. And the pictures don't do it justice. You can go to their website also. But one thing led to the other, and I became a member of their board. And I just recently rotated off the board. But it was a fantastic experience to help with that particular sanctuary. This is myself and my niece, Jerry Beth Foshi. We went to visit the place the year after. The sanctuary is right next to a place where you can stay. It's called the Blue Banyan Inn. And so that's one of the fundraising, the way that they fund their operation. But another way they fund it is to welcome tourists. And so tourism is a big part of the sanctuary. Unlike a lot of the sanctuaries in Africa, this one is really reliant on a lot of good tourism. And speaking of tourism, that's another topic I've gotten involved in. I got the opportunity, with Ann Ruston to put together an edited volume on primate-focused tourism. And I want you to, if you get a chance, try to get a copy of that, read about it. It's got great chapters in it. Anne did most of the work, I should say. I was just her sidekick. But it talks about the benefits, some of the disadvantages, but also the benefits of primate tourism. And I went with that goal when I got an opportunity to go to Mexico City, a workshop that was put together by the UNESCO Mexico people to talk about tourism and its possibility of helping us sustain the existence of primates in the future. And so this was, it became yet another one of my causes and another one of my things that I'm interested in doing. I actually did a couple of tour leadership things for National Geographic expeditions speaking of tourism. And then more service, one more opportunity to talk about service. I mentioned IUCN Red List. In 2016, we were able to invite a large group of people who study primates in Africa, except in Madagascar, because Madagascar has it's so massive, it has its own group. But we came together for an assessment workshop. And that means that all of those assessments that you see when you go to the Red List site, we went through all of the assessments for the African primates and rewrote them and upgraded them and updated them and modified the status. And it was a lot of work. And most of the work was done by the people that are listed in this green part here. The other parts of the work were done by the rest of us. But I should say that this is really the tip of the iceberg, because tons of people contribute data to this. But special shout out to Russ Mittermeier one more time for making this be such a success and for spearheading what we do all along. I got to actually write some of the assessments myself, but most of the assessments were done by others. One other thing of involvement in a society or an organization, when I was on that semester at sea voyage, I realized one thing that I kept seeing that disturbed me was the preponderance of plastic pollution that I was seeing. And it really got me thinking, something that we should really, as primatologists, we should be more concerned about. You hear a lot about sea mammals and seabirds accidentally swallowing plastic. But with primates, they fit in a whole different category, because oftentimes it's not because of some accidental thing. They know what they're doing. They can pick up a bottle and they can easily take off the lid and they can lick it. And remember what I said to you about fomites and transferring pathogens. So this idea that an endangered species like a lion-tailed macaque can be exposed to pathogens, I wanted us to be able to do something about it. So I contacted people. I already knew somebody within the Plastic Pollution Coalition and got involved with them. I'm actually now a member of their scientific advisory board, but we've put together a poster for the IPS meeting this year. We did a workshop at a previous meeting, and basically trying to just raise awareness. This is based on a survey I did of various people and their various primatologists and their primate field sites and their experience with plastic pollution. So if you'd like a copy of that poster, get in touch with me and I'll share it. And one other thing, here's Vernon Reynolds. We're just friends. Don't let the hand fool you. He's just handsy sometimes. But we have started an African primate field site network. And this is basically, currently it's just an email group that shares information. Mostly it's the idea is if any of us have a crisis that needs attention and advice, that we can share strategies for dealing with risks. So and that's brand new. It's still developing. I think right now we have a little short of 70 people as members of that site. So you're welcome to join if you email me. And one more consultancy to mention, and this won't take long because it's still ongoing. I don't want to say a whole lot about it because it's not fully funded yet, but it's another hydroelectric project. This time a smaller project, but I got involved much earlier in the session. So I was able to help design all of the survey work we're doing. Surveys include things like counting chimp nests, setting up camera traps, doing community questionnaires and so forth. So, and the aim here is to develop mitigation strategies and a management plan to put in place that would make it possible for this hydropower plant to actually happen, but at the same time, reduce the negative impacts to the environment. Chimps live there, other primates live there. And again, a reminder that the chimps that live in Sierra Leone are critically endangered, not just endangered. But if we can work together with the local people and provide the proper kind of mitigation plan and a research project put on top of it, it's a win-win for everybody. So finally, we're coming back to, it's probably Friday or Saturday by now, right? I've lost track of the time, but this is the last section. You'll remember the Kasokwa Forest project that I mentioned before, and the fact that it's continued all this time, literally more than 20 years now. And over time, we've had a few students come through. I want to point out Tyler Weldon and Donald Cole are two people that actually had been working with me at the baboon breeding facility. They actually came and did their master's work at Kasokwa. Here's Jerry Beth, my niece, and my previous niece-in-law. Coincidentally, her name is Janette, and field assistants. This one field assistant is my main field assistant now, Joseph Karamaji. I'll show you some more pictures of him in a minute. But we just kind of muddled along. We had 12 chimps there at the beginning with a research presence. We saw that the population was growing. We were having fewer animals die suddenly or disappear suddenly for a while there, and having good reproductive output. And you see this chimp crossing a road. This is a side road. I'm going to actually jump ahead on this video and show you the main road. The main road, did you see the chimp moving? This is a dangerous area. Trucks coming along on this road. And what's worse, this road that you're seeing in this picture here is currently twice as big as it used to be. It's been paved, it's been widened, and it's because of oil operation in the western part of Uganda. A very serious situation for our chimps. And you would think, anyway, except for something interesting that's happened over time. This is Kasokwa. You remember Sanso Camp is part of Budongo up here. My field assistants, Joseph and Stephen, over time, a few years back, they started saying they couldn't find one of our main adult males. And a big adult male just doesn't disappear. If it dies somewhere, I hate to be crude, but you're going to find a body or you're going to smell a body. He just was gone. And we assumed he was dead. We took him off the data sheets for 3 years. Sometimes my field assistants forget the time difference between Uganda and Oklahoma. And so one night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I get a text message saying, guess who's here? That chimp that 3 years before had disappeared had reappeared. Soon after that, our alpha male went missing. And we started getting worried about that. And then some other males or some other of the adults went missing. And my field assistant says, I'm going to go look around. Something's up. So he started going to some of these other forest areas. And sure enough, he found our chimps, and they were living here in Kitiedo. This is 4 kilometers away. Our chimps, before the widening of the road, I should add, moved to this new forest area. So we now have a new logo because you have to have a new name. And we put that logo in pretty much anything that's moving. Again, I haven't properly introduced my field assistants. So this is Joseph Karamaji on the left and Stephen Abrakenji on the right. And they live locally, and they are addicted to their cell phones. So they send me WhatsApp messages like 2-3 times a week, and I love it. We stay in touch, and we're studying the chimps mostly now at Kitiedo, because frankly, right now there are no chimps in Kasokwa. They've all moved. And I can understand why. It's a very nice forest at Kitiedo. This size of this tree that they're sending in front of, there's nothing with that kind of buttress in the original Kasokwa area. And we're able to do things like continuing our social behavior studies. We're looking at diet. That's one of the things I'm looking at right now, looking at the diet at Kitiedo compared with the diet at Casoqua to see to what extent that might have impacted their move. I think the main thing that I could probably never answer categorically is that they moved because the place they moved to had a bunch of female chimps, but no males. And that's a pretty good attraction for adult males. So now, instead of 12 chimps that we had 20 years ago that grew into about 18 or 20, now we have more than 30 because of new babies. And I'm able to look at those seasonal trends. So over the years, more seasonal trends, same kind of trends that we're seeing at Gombe and at Badongo. But a new thing that we've been doing, and this is the last bit I'll be talking about, is that we've started using camera traps. We have a policy of not getting too close to the chimps for all the reasons I've already talked to you about. So we've started spying on the chimps. And you can see this was early on when they weren't accustomed to looking at these cameras. Actually, they sometimes they look a little, they inspect a little closer. This is our alpha male. It's the same guy that had the trap on his hand that you saw earlier. But by doing this, we're able to learn a little bit more about our chimps when we're not around, taking away that possibility that our presence may actually influence their behavior. And do you remember the idea, the thing that I talked about earlier about touching your face to your hand during questions? Well, chimps do a similar kind of thing. And in their case, they do a thing, they do several things, but one is the thing that Cortland called the nose gesture. Now, today's people who study communication, they don't like to use the word gesture unless it's purposely meant to communicate something. But this is what Cortland used. And it's basically drawing the wrist up to the face after a decision has been made. And I want you to be able to see this in action. She's standing here. She's trying to decide, apparently, whether to go left or right. So just pay attention to the adult that you see there. And she's going to quickly put her hand to her face. See that? And you might think that that's just a chimp brushing its face until you start seeing it again and again and again. In this case, he stands there for a while. Actually, you're hearing some, so you see he did it, and then he makes his right turn. So this is something I'm able to see through the cam trap images that are sent to me. I should mention that the field assistants take out the memory cards and get the stuff uploaded to me. So I've now received, I'm expecting a new shipment or an upload this week of new photos. I have all of the cameras set to record 2 photos and a 25-second video. They do one other thing that's interesting. This is, wait, if you can watch the female that comes after her, sometimes they, instead of the wrist to the forehead, they touch their fingers to their face. And I've noticed that they do this only when somebody else is watching. So in this case, the communication specialist might actually call it gesture. So pay attention to this female. Did you see her touch her face? And they do this again and again and again. I see it touching their face when somebody else is around to see. So I want to thank everybody that was involved with the beginning of Casoqua and the continuing of Casoqua Kitiedo. So everything goes back to Vernon and BCTF. Richard Chimanua, he's deceased now, but he was that first field assistant that drew attention to the site. These are my current field assistants. I can't live without their work. Donald Cole and Tyler Weldon have been 2 of the students that came to the site and were so helpful and so informative with their work. Andrea Combs Wallace was not related, different spelling, was involved in helping to organize the management of data collection. And early in the stages, I got a couple of grants from the ASP and from Oakland Zoo. Most of this has been self-funded, though. And so to be able to self-fund, I still have to make a living. So I still do some continuing part-time teaching at the University of Oklahoma. I teach environmental studies program stuff. This is very part-time. Right now, it's just one class a year. And at the Oklahoma School for Science and Mathematics, this is a residential STEM school, high school for science and math students. And I teach part-time there. And it's very rewarding working with young students that are pre-college and just have a life ahead of them, and very rewarding work. All of these thank yous, I've thanked out chimps and baboons and people along the way. I have to, if you know me, anybody that knows me knows that I'm a cat person. So I have to thank my cats. And I decided to, instead of a picture of all the cats I've ever had, which would take up several slides, I decided to pick a representative, Millie, who lived for 20 years. This is her. She died more than 20 years ago, but I still miss her. And I really want to thank all of you for listening. And I can't imagine we have time for questions, but if we do, I'm happy to either take your questions now or ask you to email me your questions. I'm happy to interact with anybody who'd like to interact with me. So thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Janette. That's wonderful. Very.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, what time is it? Oh, why didn't you sit there and do this? I'm so sorry.
You might confuse it as a chimp or baboon gesture.
Yeah, that's true. But I was worried it was going to take too long, and I am so sorry. But
worth every minute, though. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you
yes.
very much. Thank you. Are there any students still around? Is anybody?
Yes. So let's see. I did promise time for Q&A, so I'd love to invite maybe a couple of questions from the audience, and those of you who are on Zoom can just raise your hand. And if anybody on YouTube has any comments or questions, you can type on the chat board. And Kasha, before, I think she had to leave for another class, but
she sent me a chat, so
yes,
I asked her to email me.
Right. Well, basically, her question, just paraphrasing here, is under what circumstance should wild animals receive medical treatment? What's the best practice these days?
That's a good. Well, these days, I'm not sure I could just answer about these days. I can talk about our experience with the baboons that you saw the several days ago when I started this lecture. And that is that the disease that we feel like they had, we were pretty sure that it's a disease called yaws. And in yaws, in humans, it's not sexually transmitted. The disease that was going on with the baboons actually still sometimes shows up in the baboons at Gombe, was being sexually transmitted. But the disease in humans, it's the same disease, can just rub off if you come in contact with somebody's clothing that has this disease. So we were worried that not only might the humans that work with them, of course, the disease probably came from local humans, but we were also worried that it was going to jump back into humans and possibly into the chimps. And because chimps are endangered and humans are not, we had that criteria of saying, if we can do something, let's do. And I think that's my policy, my feeling about treatment of diseases or problems in nature is that if it's something that humans caused the problem in the first place, it's our obligation to try to fix it. Now with Goblin, who was wounded because he was in a fight, a fair fight, he just, he outgrew his britches, and as we say in Oklahoma, and got into a fight and was challenged. we made the decision really based out of compassion to help him with medicine and to during the first time he was attacked, his testicles were torn. One of his testicles was entirely mutilated, and it was actually not long around that time where the vet was on site dealing with the baboon disease. So he darted Goblin and removed the testicle and treated him. You know, we made that decision. This was definitely a natural thing that happened, but he was our alpha male for many years. I think Goblin was alpha male for 15 years or something. Just maybe that's overstating it, but a long time. And everybody loved him. Everybody was heartbroken that he was ill and wounded by this new guy, Wilkie, who wanted to be the new alpha, who turned out to be a peach, who turned out to be a wonderful leader. But anyway, so we made a decision more based on humanitarian reasons to treat and touch him. The other thing, though, that you do with him, it was a little easier to treat him because he was so wounded. He was staying on the ground all the time. One of the things you want to worry about with something like chimps is if they have something like a snare on their hand, and you might think you want to dart them and take the snare off. You've got to think about what's the likelihood that during the process of when you've darted them, before they actually conk out, they're going to run up a tree. And if they run up a tree and then conk out, they're going to fall. You're going to be responsible for something worse happening to that chimp than so you have to think about, you have to weigh those things. You have to also weigh the situation that in a normal situation with a chimp who might be wounded, when we had at Kasokwa, when we had our alpha male walking around with that man trap, he was always with the two other males. They were always with him. They never abandoned him. They didn't try to take advantage of the leadership role and try to usurp him or anything. We called them the three amigos when they were walking around together all the time. It was just so funny. We still call them the three amigos, only now there are four because we have one that's gotten older. But if we had tried to dart Kamontu during that time that he was carrying, the other guys, Aboki and Sakari, would have attacked us because they would see us as threatening because they would be right there. So that's what made it actually an easy call with Goblin, because he was on his own. He was staying on the ground. We could do whatever we needed to or wanted to with him. But so that's a long-winded way of answering the question. Oftentimes you have to just weigh the situation. I think that if you're working as part of a team, you need to vote. You need to get some kind of a consensus, make sure everybody's on the same page. Obviously, working in a national park, we had to get permission from the national park personnel. We had to get permission from TANAPA to do any of the physical involvement. I actually got in trouble from the national park at one point when one of the chimps that we all really had a lot of affection for died, and I had her body buried. I got in trouble for that because I didn't get permission, and I wasn't letting nature take its course. So that's the other thing. Making those decisions, you're not making a decision on your own ever. You're working as a team, and you're paying attention to whether you have the authority and the approval to do what you want to do. And the skill. You can't go about doing, we never would have undertaken the darting of the baboons and doing the treatment if we didn't have a trained medical person on site to oversee the things. I was poking with needles and so forth, but I definitely had somebody looking over my shoulder, knowing that, if I messed up, I was at fault. So, another question?
if no one else is raising their voice, I have one, Janette.
Okay.
First of all, thanks so much. That was really,
Thank you. Thank
yeah, it was
you.
really inspiring, actually, and super interesting.
Oh,
I took a
thank
lot
you.
of notes, and
Oh,
I was wondering, maybe earlier I said that we might put this as an audio thing, but if you're interested, I'd have a lot of follow-up questions that maybe we can just do a standalone interview if that's something that
oh,
is interesting to you.
I would be happy to, although you can see that I talk a lot, so.
That's perfect. In
Yeah,
my
we
world,
gotta
in my
make
world, that's
sure that-
perfect.
Okay. Okay. So,
But-
yeah, so email me and we can set
Sure.
up something that'd be fun.
But I did have a question, and you
Yeah.
mentioned a few times, so this consulting, and you've been involved in I guess the preamble before developments for hydroelectric and things like that in Africa. And I kind of wonder, so we've had colleagues here at our institute as well who do that for bats, for example, bat surveys for development in kind of northern hemisphere, in temperate forests, sorry. But I've never really seen or thought about it for chimpanzees and how common that is to get like the chimpanzee representation in there. So I wonder maybe if you could comment on how that went for you, and how seriously those development organizations and maybe the government takes, obviously, I guess with chimpanzees are quite charismatic and famous animals and important for conservation, but maybe you could just walk us through that a bit. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's actually something that's changed quite a bit from that first consultancy to the one I'm doing now, which again, they're both in Sierra Leone, but different organizations hired me. And that is that because of the development of because of the advancement for so many development projects, whether it's hydroelectric, mining, forestry, lots of different projects that are infrastructure projects, development projects that are impacting primate habitat, particularly great ape habitat. Members of the primate specialist group, great ape section, or actually, I think they're called the great ape section now, because they also include gibbons, but they've actually developed an advisory panel, and there's a whole website. I can refer you to that. But what they do is give advice to organizations that are looking to, I'm kind of saying this wrong. Let me back up a minute. One thing that's happened actually is at the funding level, the funders, people like World Bank, but other people on their level and big, huge international banks, they're actually part of a group that has developed standards that say, if you want our money for your mining operation or your hydroelectric operation or whatever, you've got to meet certain standards that we've written up. And they include things like environmental issues. And there's actually a section that talks about endangered species. If you're going to do your work in an area where an endangered species lives, you've got to do X, Y, Z. And part of that X, Y, Z has to do with bringing in people like me who will help decide how we can modify the program, mitigate what's going to happen. Or in some cases, like what they did with the first Sierra Leone project, one of the ideas was that the flooding of the area would be slowed down so that it wouldn't just be this big rush of water, but that any kind of animal that was living in that area, even if people happened to be walking along, wouldn't suddenly be drowned. So they would slowly be pushed up either side of the hill. So that, that's one little tiny but pretty important thing that you can do for a project like that. But the other thing that they did in that plan, and I wasn't a part of this, so I don't know how all of this went, but the group funding it and the group organizing it actually set aside another part of the country for a new reserve, a new national park protected area. And so it's not the same chimps that are being protected, but it was sort of an offset kind of idea of being able to what's the word I'm looking for? Life is getting too quick here, but just kind of a compromise. We can't save everything that's there, maybe. We're going to try, but if we can't, at least we're going to do a better job over here and protect them. In the current place I'm working, one of the things that, or I'm not working there, but I'm giving advice to them. It's so big, and the actual weir, do you know what a weir is? It's like an inflatable dam. So it's not a big concrete dam. It's just kind of it's a much smaller operation. And the inundation area is much smaller, much, much, much smaller than the one that I showed you on the slide. Our feeling as we've continued to survey the area is that the chimps using that inundation area now also use a huge amount of either side of the river. And so we currently, the data currently indicate that it's going to impact their environment very little. And so I don't know if that's completely answer your question, but I should say, I want to go out on the limb and say there is a growing opportunity for primatologists to get these consulting jobs, because these development projects like hydroelectricity and like mining operations are being required by oil is another one. They're being required by their funders to get expertise to come in and play a role. So it's really, if it all continues to work out well, that's a real win for primates. Because as you can imagine, this is one of those classic umbrella species kind of things. We're there to protect the chimpanzees, but if baboons live there, or something that's common, or something that's not necessarily everybody's favorite animal also lives there, they're going to get that protection that is given because of the chimps. So again, another win for another set of wildlife.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Right.
Any other? Yes.
Yeah, well, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up today's lecture.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn off the live streaming, but please give Dr. Wallis another round of applause.
Thank you.